That note, closing in at the highs of the day, 11,500 plus. Bharti, a big winner today, 7% higher. Biocon goes home with an 8% gain, and steel as well saw move 6.5% higher for both Jindal as well as JSW Steel. PVR as well was a surprise mover here, 5.5% uptick coming in. The breath turns in positive. However, you did have your fair share of sulkers as well. What with the idea fall? Not the lows of the day, the 20% crack which came in after the Supreme Court verdict on the AGR dues. They're going to be paying up the AGR dues in 10 years, so 20% lower at the day's lows, but now going home with a 14% loss. Infratel as well has been a loser today, 5.5% lower there. Bosch, ONGC, MGL as well have seen some dips come in. Some ebbing off for Tata Motors, which has had a very choppy session today. TechM as well goes home with a 1.5% loss. Add to the list of movers, you're also seeing renewed price action for Tata Consumer, which scales up well above the 550 rupee per share level, closing in at the highs of the day. Naukri as well as Info Edge has held out by about 2%. So these have been some standout performers in trade. Within the Nifty, of course, it's also been a Bharti, Hindalco, Bajaj Finance, Tata Steel, Asian Paints, which has been a very steady mover, and Cipla and SBI, which have also made a good up move. SBI goes home at 219, an uptick of roughly about 3%. Kotak Bank, DRL, Hindalco have been some of the other movers. On the flip side, there was ONGC, TechM, Axis, Infosys, Z, which have been a few laggards in trade. Avan, what about the newsmakers, besides, of course, what we've already seen on telecom? Abha?
Okay. Well, so apart from, of course, telecom being the highlight, it was an interesting day overall, 0.7% higher, as CK earlier mentioned, managed to maintain that range and closed at about 11,465, so well towards the day's high. And across the board as well. It was interesting to see a certain mix of names that came back into action today. So the metal names, steel majors, Hindalco, a couple of these that came back. NTPC was back in action. Power stocks, Adani Transmission up about 5% or so. Power Finance was back again. So we saw that theme as well. REC, add that to the list that came back. Pharma names also stood out in trade. Biocon aside, some of the others were also bouncing around. So a couple of pockets that we saw resurgent action in. Even from the financials, it was a Bajaj Finance, an SBI, for example, some of the names that stood out in trade, and quite strongly that too. Other than that, Eicher Motors from the auto names, Escorts was up 2.5%, Maruti, for example, L&T a touch as well, post the Schneider deal. So a couple of these blue chips stood out. Of course, clearly on the downside, it was Vodafone, Infratel, a couple of the other financials that weren't looking all that great in today's session, while Bharti, of course, coming back to telecom, was up 7%. PVR, despite some sell calls, actually was still up about 7%. So the jury remains out when it comes to some of these majors.